Why economists make better police officers in the war on drugs. With uncertainty on how to handle the world's growing addiction problems, governments have resolutely stuck with the unsuccessful policies already in place. With every passing year, the result becomes plainer to see. The all-out war approach has failed to cut the numbers of consumers, while it has driven up the prices of a few cheap agricultural commodities to create a hideously violent $300 billion global industry. This is one of the final paragraphs in Tom Wainwright's 2016 business book, Narconomics, How to Run a Drug Cartel. And in this book, Tom breaks down the similar business practices between large corporations and notorious drug cartels. He talks about everything from franchising to e-commerce and how with a pinch of business savviness and a pound of violence, you too could become a drug kingpin. I pointed out a couple of examples in a previous reel, but in this video, we'll discuss the last chapter of the book where Tom states his reasons of why economists make better police officers in the war on drugs than the police themselves. Fighting fire with fire is such an outdated, useless approach, and Tom points this out by examining former Mexican President Felipe Calderon's time in office, a man who ran his campaign on a declaration of war against the country's drug cartels, only for his presidency to end with 60,000 murders and cementing himself as one of Mexico's most unpopular presidents. The sober analysis of crime as business is being used even more widely as governments realize that there is something to be learned from looking at organized crime as a profit-making enterprise. With this realization, Tom points out 4 major mistakes in the approach of tackling the drug crisis. Mistake 1, the obsession with the supply. Mistake 2, saving money early on and paying for it later. Mistake 3, acting nationally against a global business. Mistake 4, confusing prohibition with control. We'll briefly look at each mistake and make the final analysis from there. Mistake 1, the obsession with the supply. When the price of a product goes up, the amount consumed generally falls, but the size of the fall in consumption varies. Demand for some goods is elastic, meaning that it drops drastically following even a small increase in price. Demand of other products is inelastic, meaning that consumers will keep buying more or less the same amount as before, even in the face of big price rises. Plainly put, the demand for drugs is inelastic. What would happen if the government instead focused on the demand side of the equation? Tom states that policies like a public health campaign, leisure facilities for teenagers, and rehab for addicts, for example, could make the demand drop. This would then have the dealers cut their prices and fight amongst themselves for a smaller pool of customers. Attacking the supply can only reduce consumption by driving up prices and therefore criminal revenues. Attacking demand can reduce both. Mistake 2, saving money early on and paying for it later. In this segment, Tom uses a small town, Keene, New Hampshire, that had a rising number of prison inmates to prove this point. The town was spending less on prisons, causing one of them to close and cramming more prisoners into fewer cells. As the town cut down more money, it directly affected the educational courses and rehabilitation programs for prisoners. What was crazy was Keene, New Hampshire, for all intents and purposes, was a safe town with only 3 homicides in a 13-year span. Yet, as the town slashed its budget, it purchased a $285,000 armored personal police vehicle, because why not? When it comes to fighting crime, money is no objective, as long as it's spent on enforcement rather than prevention. Tom goes on to somewhat of a rant stating, making cuts to rehab and education programs in jails might save a few $1,000s, but if it means even a handful of prisoners failing to learn to read or to kick their drug addiction as a result of reoffending rather than finding work on their release, the cost is immense. For every $1 million spent on treatment, the consumption of more than 100 kilograms of cocaine is averted. In other words, treatment is up to 10 times more cost-effective than enforcement. The boring but unsurprising truth is that it costs less money to get someone off drugs and into a job than it does to chase this person down in an armored police carrier. Mistake 3, acting nationally against a global business. The trouble is that where cartels are a multinational business, there exists no real multinational regulator to keep on top of them. The closest thing is the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, but it seems to be somewhat committed to defending the strategy of suppressing supply, that it isn't a very honest assessor of the policy's shortcomings. Tom argues that the structure of the global market has made political deadlock inevitable. Historically, most countries fall into one of 3 categories: those where drugs are produced, those where they are trafficked, or those where they are consumed. This allows governments and their voters to see only one side of the drug industry. Consumer countries like America, which simply want to stop the drugs reaching their shores, have argued for a tax on the trade to be as severe as possible and to be made at the earliest point in the supply chain. For their part, producer and transit countries don't see why they should invest their own money and lives in suppressing a business whose ill effects are felt mostly outside their own borders. All in all, it would take countries a concerted effort to address their own domestic drug crisis and a collective effort to tame the international drug control regime at large. Mistake 4, confusing prohibition with control. If you really want to get drugs under control, if you really want to put the cartels out of business and protect the public, prohibition is not an effective way to do it. Tom argues that the case now most often made for is the legalization of drugs, and not because drugs are safe, it's because drugs are dangerous, and that bringing them within the law is a more effective way to control them than leaving them to the mafia. This book was written in 2016, and Tom uses Colorado as one of the main examples. There, drugs are tested for safety and strength, clearly labeled, packaged in child-safe containers, and sold in limited quantities. The state gained a new stream of income and saves money by making many fewer arrests. The idea is that through managed ration use, addicts are gradually able to wean themselves off the drug. Yet, Tom is rather pessimistic near the end of the book. Referencing Richard Nixon's war on drug sentiment, he states that until there is a radical change in strategy, business conditions for the mafia will remain promising. Half a century after Nixon's war was declared, sadly, there has never been a better time to run a drug cartel. If you're looking to get your drug cartel up and running, give Narconomics How to Run a Drug Cartel a read, and see if his works can help give you the solutions to one of the world's most profitable business ventures. Like if you enjoyed this segment, share if it could benefit others, subscribe for more book-related content. Till then, stay in the book and stay out the way.